there, Portland. I'm your host, Corey Wolfe. This is Equity Repair, and Portland's city government is changing. We used to have 4 city council members for each district, and soon we will have 12, 3 in each district. We're making big changes to government, but we also need some big changes on the ground in terms of our infrastructure, in terms of the way we engage with our economy, including with our neighbors. And my guest here today is Chris Henry. He's running for District 4 City Council, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how we can restructure our lives entirely, basically, to make ourselves more sustainable and to get ready for the Great Cascadia earthquake. So yeah, that's Chris Henry. That's his campaign manager, Thomas Haroun, and that is bioregionalist Alexander Baratich. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, what's up, guys? How we doing?
Oh, good. Well, we're starting on our campaign. We're progressing pretty well. We're working on the public funding right now and trying to secure that. We've been approved for public funding on the small donor elections. So it's a whole new way of doing politics in Portland. And that is going to change the way Oregon looks at politics. So what happens here may be patterned much more broadly, say in Multnomah County in Oregon. But we've got proportional representation with multi-member districts. So voters approved that. So now instead of having just like we look here, the 4 council members and the mayor is no longer on the council. Okay. So mayor doesn't have a deciding vote. And so now it's going to be 12. And the 12 council members, then they've completely restructured the podium that they'll be sitting at. So it no longer looks like this. They've completely redone where the podium where you're going to be sitting at, or the table. And it's going to have, I think it's got 4, and 4, so it's quite interesting in a U shape. So in order to be engaging with the public.
And they're all just daggering the mayor with their ideas and their opinions. And the mayor has to syncretize everything, right?
Yeah, well, the mayor is no longer sitting on the council. I don't know if there's a seat for the mayor while they're discussing things, because the mayor is more like an executive position. Okay. But then the mayor also does not control nobody. It used to be where the council members and the mayor would control the different bureaus in the government, and now it's put off to a city manager, and who can be hired and fired by the council.
So it sounds to me like the council members are taking on more of a legislative role, specifically in the mayor and the city manager are the executive branch.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. Okay, and how confident do you feel that this is going to give us the correct representation as a city and maybe more effectively roll things along? Like I know you worked on campaign finance reform, and you made a pretty monumental change, and I think that we're all pretty happy about that. So if you want to comment on that as well.
Yeah.
By all means.
It's going to change the way things look, because it will be sort of a legislative branch where we set the policy, we set the laws for Portland, and then they need to be implemented by the mayor. So with campaign finance reform, what that does is when you're running for election, you can no longer put large sums of money up against a candidate or for a candidate. And we also have in their taglines so that the people who are donating have to list the top 5 donors in every print ad that they have, and that way who's giving the money. Okay. It can't be some warm and fuzzy PAC name, like it has to be so and so who works for PGE or whatever. You see who they work for and whatnot. So you will no longer see PACs because corporations have been banned from donating, so it's just individuals. Also unions have been banned, but you can set up small donor committees. and you can raise up funds through that small donor committee up to a certain amount per person. But it has to be that person's money. They sign that, yes, it is my donation. I haven't been given it to, give to the committee.
Right.
So we set up probably the most stringent campaign finance laws in Portland, and we did that after we passed it in Multnomah County, and we passed it by 86%.
Wow.
So it was almost 90%. So you're looking at it and we're going, that's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
Let's see if it'll go in Portland and if it will take hold in Portland races. So we've got it passed in Multnomah, then Portland passed by, I think it was like 82 or 84%.
Seems popular.
So it was a very popular idea.
Okay, well, so if I was, let's say, the CEO of Nike or Adidas and I have $1.5 million, you're trying to tell me that I can't just say, hey, give me some favorable tax breaks, City of Portland.
Oh,
if you get elected.
Sure, they could probably still say that, but that's probably illegal.
Right, it's illegal now.
I think it's appropriate because Phil Knight's $350 is just as good as your $350 or mine or Alexander's or Thomas's.
Right.
So you're maxed out on how much you can give each candidate and how much they can take in from someone each election cycle.
But certainly you still want to get endorsements from people of note rather than just their money. And so who are some endorsements that you've had so far?
Well, I've got endorsements from the Independent Party, the Progressive Party, and I think we're working on some other endorsements too.
Yeah, do you want to comment on that, Thomas?
Yeah, well, one endorsement that I'm really excited about is David Delk. He's the co-founder and I believe president of the Alliance for Democracy, which is one of the organizations that has been really leading the way in bringing about these campaign finance reform changes as part of the Honest Elections Action League. He is also the co-founder of the Oregon Public Banking Alliance, and so maybe we can get into that a bit. But what I love about Chris's campaign and vision for Portland is that it is really based in a lot of these grassroots efforts to not just achieve political change, but we see campaign finance reform as the first step to opening up the political realm so that we can have change in the economy, so that people can have more say in what kind of work they do, how they do that work, and to really make a living fair and square with a higher minimum wage, more cooperative structures in the workplace. And we think that a public bank is a really great way to do that by cutting Wall Street out of the city's finances. So that's one endorsement we're very happy to have. He's the leader in that field. Another endorsement we're very excited about is Alexander right here. So maybe he can talk a little bit about why he likes Chris's campaign.
Well, besides the fact that Chris is a friend of mine, this stuff we've talked about over and over again, I support and stuff like that. He's about localization and community and empowerment of the community, about obviously getting rid of money out of campaigns, or not getting rid of money, but getting that limitation to it, and stuff like that. And it's like, cool. I'm endorsing him as a friend and as I'm a bioregionalist, but I can't endorse him as a group because I have no group. I'm a member of groups, but I'm not. I can't be a spokesperson for everything. But
I don't know about that, Alexander. I mean,
but I definitely can endorse him as a
something.
friend.
You're known for something. What are you known for?
My humor.
Alexander is the designer of the Cascadia flag, the blue, white, and green, and then with the tree in the middle. Yeah. But yeah, he's too humble for that. Anyway.
So besides being a bioregionalist, I'm also an artist and teacher. And definitely, if you're listening to this, which you are, because you're watching, or at least you're watching it, definitely listen to Chris. He's a very interesting person. Get to know him, know his campaign. I definitely endorse that. I can't speak for anybody else. I can convince my family to vote for you, which I've already done in the past.
And donations, huh? We need donations too.
Yeah. I could tell people. I definitely tell people you should vote for Chris.
Yeah, but we can't advertise for donations on
No,
public assets.
no.
Okay, so cut that.
Best thing to do is vote for him. That's
the main thing we want.
That's the thing. Now that we have matching funds in the city, we can focus less on just trying to get donations, and more about going to the voters, talking to them about the issues that are important. Because donations are matched 10-1, so we can really focus more on just doing that outreach and hearing what's important to people and doing our best to craft our policies to be responsive to that and what the city needs.
So speaking of those policies, sorry, Alexander.
I was going to say, as one who is endorsing Chris, I would say, as I said before, look him up, read about him, get to know who he is, get to know the other candidates as well. I think you'll like Chris a lot, and become very much part of your community. Be active, whatever means you can. Could be simply growing food. It could be simply knocking on your neighbor's door and asking how they're doing. But get to know Chris as well. So,
Yeah. Well, neighbor to neighbor and building mutual aid networks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So speaking of the policies that we're trying to advocate for, I know we've spoken a little bit about public banks. We know we've been speaking about your push for a more democratic society, broadly speaking. Are there any more policies that you want to discuss, maybe especially around earthquake preparedness? Like, what does Cascadia Ready mean?
Yeah, Cascadia Ready means someday, we don't know when, but soon there will be a big one. I live down in California. I moved up here 26 years ago. I think I've been living here almost 30 years, 26, and my daughter's almost 30. And I lived through the Northridge earthquake. I was driving down to work at 4 o'clock in the morning, and one of the bridges went out. The traffic backed up. We didn't have cell phones at the time, so I had no idea what was happening. You had to listen in on the radio. You could kind of tell there was a shaker going on, and the traffic stopped. I had to turn around, and I called into work. They said, yeah, there's an earthquake, and just turn around and head home. The bridge is out in front of you. There was a motorcycle cop who he was heading to work down into the LA basin from the high desert. And he went off the end of the bridge and hit the pillar. And I poured the concrete on all these bridges that went out, all of the freeways that buckled, all of the, like the Northridge, CSUN, Cal State Northridge parking structure that collapsed. There were apartment buildings that collapsed. And the governor approved it to be able to run a truck driver 16 hours when, you could only run, I think at the time it was 12 hours was the law at the time. It might have been 14, but they really put you over, and they worked me 7 days a week. We poured on actually the LA River, which is a big concrete aqueduct, sort of. When there are floods, it heads out to the ocean. And we poured on that because there were cracks in that, and it buckled. It was just... so I can see it happening here. If it were to happen here, and they're talking about the Cascadia subduction fault, which is literally right off the coast, there could be a tidal wave. It could come inland and up the river. They're expecting it to be. They've said up to a 9,
right,
which is just crazy.
And would that be a magnitude 9 earthquake where we are, or at the subduction zone?
Even if it was at the subduction zone, we're going to feel it.
Yeah.
We're going to feel that shift in land. With the San Andreas fault, most of it is slip strike, so it goes side to side, and that's a subduction. So one plate is going under the other.
Right.
So it's.
So are we going to gain elevation?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we're very much in the danger zone. In fact, the representative for FEMA for our district is on the record saying everything west of I-5 will be toast. Yep. And that's a bit of that's a bit too the dichotomous. It's not like I-5 is a natural boundary determining the safe zone.
Yeah.
The real natural boundary is actually the Cascade Mountains themselves. They're like pegs. They stabilize the earth. And so east of the mountains is where it's not gonna, they'll still feel some shaking, but it's not like a major hazard. And that's why Bend is the state's emergency preparedness and coordination center, but it's, you know, a couple hours east of us.
Yeah.
We are very much in the hotspot zone.
Yeah.
And like Multnomah County has commissioned studies, like they did a simulation of the Burnside Bridge pretty much completely collapsing.
Oh, no.
Pretty much all the bridges, save the most recent one, were designed without earthquake safety in mind and are not thought to be operative after this hits. There's about 100,000 homes in Portland that are thought to won't survive, and a lot of them are going to sustain damage. So it's like, it's going to be a really big earthquake, and we really got to be getting ready for it.
The last time this earthquake hit was in 1700, and indigenous people were still talking about when Lewis and Clark got here in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
They were just that much shock. They were talking about huge tidal waves. There's stories about Thunderbird fighting with a whale out in the ocean. That's what, you know, part of their mythology and their, you know, their narrative to that. The fact that it was in the 1700s and we're now in the 20th century, 21st century, means we're kind of overdue. But it could be another 300 years. It could be right now or in the next 300 years. And they're talking about liquefaction of soil around bridges where it just becomes almost liquid. So solid ground would be like all of a sudden like water. You'd be sinking in it.
Yeah.
So it's that big of a quake.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is what I like about Cascadia Ready is, and I've been part of we had a peak oil group, a Portland peak oil group that actually was focused on that 20 years ago as well. And it's really a continuation of it. What you see people doing usually is, oh, let's prepare, like making the buildings more structurally, it can withstand that. And what I like about Cascadia Ready is we need to be creating networks of communities, how you respond, how you survive afterwards, you know, the things of like, maybe if we start growing food ahead of time and had that whole mindset of, you know, you're not just sitting there waiting for an emergency vehicle to show up, but actually saying, should I go knock on my neighbor's door, make sure they're okay and stuff like that. That's what really needs to happen, is that preparedness of creating community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And it seems like we have a convergence of crises. We have climate change that we need to prepare for on top of all of these. And imagine how much harder it's going to be to find, you know, comfortable shelter when it's going to be, you know, blazing hot out if it's in the summer, or, you know, extremely cold if the polar vortex gets further destabilized and it's like an ice storm. I mean, I can see so many different horrible scenarios happening. And so, yeah, I'm definitely concerned with what specific policies we can do to, like, let's say, spur more community gardens, or maybe mushroom production, or what have you.
And the beauty of that is by doing it that way, you're not just preparing for an earthquake.
Right.
You know,
we're preparing for all disasters.
All disasters. Let's say, you know, it could be wildfires. How do you prepare in the sense of not just having food, but having your house prepared for whatever disaster it is? Maybe it's removing brush around the house so there isn't fire around it. Or maybe it's, which would happen in an earthquake too, by the way, or could happen. It's preparing the house, so if there's a quake, how do you survive that within the house? But it's also about, again, community. Community is everything with it. It's key.
Now, I know you love community, and I do too, but we have to talk money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, how much money would it cost to make all these repairs that all of the disasters that are incoming? Do we know? Do we have a figure about, like, how many billions? I'm sure it's going to be in the billions.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think the estimate for the bridge retrofitting is $1 billion each at a minimum. We got about a dozen bridges, and that is a lot, and it sounds like a lot, but at the same time, the city of Portland has a budget of $8 billion every year. So if this were a serious priority for city council, we could be investing in those kinds of infrastructure repairs. We could be working with the state, because this is not just city infrastructure, it's also state infrastructure. Instead of ODOT putting $500 million towards a highway expansion, which climate groups are protesting because of it's going to increase pollution, instead those $500 million investments could be going into earthquake preparedness and more ecologically friendly, climate resilient investments and things like that. And so we look at the budget priorities now. there's only $5 million a year going to the Portland Bureau of Energy Management, Emergency Management from the city. Out of $8 billion. That's less than 1%, while we're paying $100 million every year to Wall Street just as interest on loans. And so one of the things I really liked about Chris's campaign is he's talking about fundamentally changing the way the city of Portland allocates its budget to be more democratic, to cut Wall Street out. And so maybe you want to talk about that as the key. Key to
absolutely.
The solution.
So what we could do is we could use the existing budget that you're speaking of, and we could apply that to emergency management. And I think the freeways will do just fine. We're talking about things like expanding the freeway. We're talking about capping the other freeway, and we're talking about doing a Columbia River crossing still. And that is coming from federal dollars mostly. But there's also some state dollars involved in this. But when we're sending money to Wall Street, Portland, Oregon does the same thing. Almost every community is investing in Wall Street, and you're sending money to military contractors. You're not sure where that money is being invested, so it can be invested in military contracts. It could be invested in sending arms to Israel and to Ukraine, and we don't have any control over that. One thing that Oregon itself invests in Wall Street, that when I ran twice for Oregon State Treasurer, and I got 5% or near 5% in each race, in 2016 and 2020, we focused on the NSO group, which is an Israeli spyware company that actually put forward the Pegasus spyware that was in Khashoggi's phone to track his phone and his whereabouts when he was basically kidnapped and chopped up at the Saudi embassy. So so Oregon, when I was running for treasurer, part of my campaign was focusing on that funding. And what we were doing is Oregon is the largest investor. Our PERS pension funds are being invested in the NSO group. We are the major, the top donor, or
that is
the top investor rather in that. In that fund.
That's pretty jarring because we're not really the biggest economy in terms of, the other states in the country. We have California, Texas, and New York, which are like basically their own countries in terms of their economic output, and somehow Oregon is the number one investor.
Exactly. And and I just thought that was interesting that we come out as top dog on that investment, and it just didn't sit right with me, so I made it a pillar of my campaign to bring that up and to make people aware of that.
And one of the ways that intersects with the city too is that the city of Portland, actually the retirement funds for all of city employees are being invested through the Oregon PERS fund that Chris was talking about. So it's not just a state level issue,
extension.
It's a city level issue. And this actually goes against what the Human Rights Commission had voted for and was implemented in Portland 2015 to 2017 to divest from military contracts, these companies facilitating Israeli abuses, fossil fuel companies, Wall Street. All of that was divested, and then the Human Rights Commission was suddenly just decommissioned in 2020 very suddenly during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Even though it was all volunteer, they said it's because there wasn't funding for it. And it's just never been brought back. So we want to both...
And so what we would do...
No, go ahead.
So what my campaigns argued for state treasurer in 2016 2020 was to develop a state bank. And with that, if you can have a state bank, you can also have a municipal bank, and these are like public utilities. They're owned by we the people. So you'd be basically bringing that money back from the Wall Street middlemen and vulture capitalists. You'd bring that money back here to work in Oregon, in Portland City. You'd bring it back to work in Portland City. In our our communities and our neighborhoods, we then would have control. You would have a voice in Portland, how it was managing those funds. And you could come to the board meetings. You'd have to elect a 5-member board. People would be able to go to those board meetings. So, we would all be investors in that fund, in the Portland Bank. And then you can do things like infrastructure projects where you're reinvesting in the community without floating bonds on Wall Street in order to do a huge project. You need streets done or whatever, and the neighbors float a bond on Wall Street. Instead of doing that, you can go to your city bank, and for a super low interest loan, and sometimes maybe no interest, is you could then do things like in your neighborhood you could do solar panels on every house or something like that. So this actually goes hand in hand with something else I want to do, is to create or turn PGE into a PUD. If you don't mind talking about that.
No, absolutely, please.
Yeah, especially with electricity rates going up.
Yeah. So PGE has recently, this last year, they've raised the rates 18%. Now they were looking to raise it 7%. Now they've come back to the table because it was shot down, and they're trying to do it again. So that's 25% that they would increase the rates.
Over 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So why they are increasing the rates is they are suing the EPA, and they're using our rates to sue the Environmental Protection Agency in order to pollute more. So it's kind of counterintuitive that you think that there's this warm, green, and fuzzy PGE out there, and they're using our funds to be able to sue the EPA, which is not cool. It's not just that, but they also have a project that they're going around. They're speaking at one neighborhood association. They'll be speaking at another neighborhood association, the Linton neighborhood, on the 24th of September, and I plan to go to that. And it would be nice because I would like to be chief petitioner of PGE PUD, or we could call it something else. I've been wanting to create an Our Oregon ratepayers. It would be Oregon United Ratepayers, Our PUD. So it could be Our PUD, and PUD is basically a public utility district, but here in Oregon we call them People's Utility Districts. That's literally written into the utility board. That's what we call them when you create a public utility here in Oregon. It's a People's Utility District.
So there is already sort of a legislative groundwork for it. It's just that PGE has essentially monopolized the energy.
Yeah, and we have some PUDs here in Oregon. I think we're at about 20% or thereabouts, and these are rough figures. And then in Washington, this is from a campaign. We ran PUDs back in 2004. We ran 3 of them, and they went down miserably because PGE was allowed to campaign against us. So they put up huge billboards, and they spent like a lot of money defeating our campaigns, and we got 25%-ish in each of the races. But we ran PUDs in each of the 3 tri-counties in the metro counties, in Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas. And we ran them all at the same time. When you run a PUD, you run the initiative. We gathered the signatures for the initiative. We got it on the ballot, and then you have to run 5 people who are going to be on the board, and then they have to be elected. So it's democratic as well as the public bank idea. So these are both democratic ideas where we, the people, have a say in what you're doing with the Portland bank with the funds. You will have a say there, and then you will have a say in your utility. But we should be changing also at the state level. We should be changing what exactly is a PUD, what constitutes a PUD. Just my opinion is I think it should be expanded beyond electricity, water, and other traditional utilities. Maybe it's grocery stores. Maybe it's factory farms that becomes a public utility. And maybe it's the petroleum industry, so that we can own Zenith and then we can go ahead and shut it down. You can do other things and ban it, but Zenith is one entity. There are other areas where you need to, I think, control it. And people say, well, why don't we just focus on getting the electrical grid and making that a public utility? But then you have the profit-driven petroleum industry that is still going to exist for some time. And as long as it's profit-driven, it's going to exist for a while, alongside the electrical PUD, if you create electrical PUD. So,
and they're going to be funneling those profits into all those investments that we don't like, like Raytheon, Boeing. Sorry, not to name names. Maybe cut that. I don't know.
We can name names.
The blank industrial complex. Let's just say that. Yeah. You can fill in the blanks. And I would really prefer a lot of those dollars to be put into things like, rocket stove water heaters to heat up my sauna, or perhaps pallet benches that could be, constructed as a community project. I could see so many different ways to use those public funds that are currently being siphoned off into the private sector. So I really admire that vision you have. I had a question about Zenith. I think it was more about the how are we going to replace that degree of energy infrastructure in the state of Oregon? Because if 90% of our fuel is coming in through Zenith, that port that's in Linton, what are we going to do about that? That's a lot of fuel.
Yeah, I think that we need to come at this from an approach of abundance rather than scarcity. So the total amount of sunlight, for instance, that comes onto the earth is like many, many, many thousands of times more than all of our energy needs. But we have a very wasteful approach to it, and instead we're looking at this very scarce resource of underground fossil fuels instead of the abundance of sunlight and everything that comes from it. So of course that's like photovoltaic solar, and that's certainly better than fossil fuels, but we shouldn't just have our eggs in one basket. And so one of the resources that Oregon does have quite a lot of is really good agricultural land. And we're also like the leading state as far as the cannabis industry goes. But when hemp was legalized in 2018, there was no infrastructure for doing anything with it other than making CBD. So a bunch of farmers went to it, the CBD market imploded, and now there are fewer farmers, fewer acres in Oregon actually growing industrial hemp than there were before it was federally legalized. And what is so disappointing about that is how many different things industrial hemp can be used for. So energy is one of those. It's way more efficient in terms of biodiesel and biofuels than the traditional debate over like ethanol, corn ethanol. Like that is a crop that is traditionally a food crop. It's not like a multi-purpose crop like hemp. Hemp is much more efficient. It doesn't really take away from growing for food to use it for fuel. And if you use methods like pyrolysis, you can actually have carbon negative energy because you're making by burning it in an oxygen-free environment, you get something called biochar, which is a soil amendment. It puts carbon in the ground. It's the longest term storage of any kind of organic content of carbon that we know of in the Amazon. Native tribes have been using this and doing food forestry in the Amazon for tens of thousands of years. They're like biochar soils that are 10,000 years old. And so we can be developing biogas, and we have a lot of amazing universities in Portland and in Oregon, so we can have real green fuel, and we can be upscaling the biochar economy at the same time, reducing the fire risk in the forests of Oregon by pyrolyzing all of the brush that is catching on fire. And then all the other amazing things we could be doing with hemp, like making paper, like making bioplastics, making textiles, making sustainable construction materials for earthquake resistant homes. all of that can be part of like a real renaissance, and it's a way to bring together the rural and urban areas of Oregon, because that has traditionally been somewhat of a divide. But the rural areas weren't able to jump into the hemp economy because we didn't have the paper mills for hemp, we didn't have the decorticators, the expensive investments in infrastructure, where all of a sudden, if we're not sending $100 million to Wall Street, but instead we have a people's bank that is investing in climate resilience, we can be jump starting the hemp industry. We can be actually investing in carbon negative fuels, solar, wind, the whole range of those things, as well as just getting away from the deforestation, because we're using hemp for making things like paper and wood. And so we can be doing all of that. We can be employing people to do all of those things. We can be revitalizing the rural economy, bringing it all together in that way. So actually, and that's just like one plant. That's hemp.
That's true.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I tried to make the Cascadian flag out of hemp one time. We were going to do that. That was our project for the Cascadian Flag Cooperative. And trying to do that was impossible. Even trying to get hemp imported was impossible almost. It's like, okay, well, I know that Romania produces hemp. Well, no, the Chinese have taken it over. And I tried to do all this stuff, and I had somebody who was going to even be an investor. So, well, you have to make it out of hemp, so we need to grow hemp here, or cannabis. And it's like, but there isn't the economy for it. There isn't the factories to switch it to a fabric. We don't have any of the infrastructure for it. Mm-hmm. We could be investing in it. There's nothing stopping us from doing it except for our will. And the will is controlled by a capitalist system of profit making, which is really a neoliberal capitalist system, which is, we'll just get it from China. We'll get it from, we'll take all of our supplies and send them, or the materials, and send them to another company or another country to make the materials. So it was almost impossible. It is impossible at this point.
Right.
That brings back something I wanted to talk about earlier, which was with the Cascadia Ready. And it's like, you want to see an example of a place that was hit by a disaster and where privatization became also part of that disaster. And that's New Orleans, when they had the big hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Sandy, yeah. Was it Sandy? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Both.
When they got hit by that, all of a sudden they said, okay, we're going to bring on all these private companies to basically screw over the population.
I've heard the term disaster capitalism.
Yeah, disaster capitalism, which I know you have that book of Naomi Campbell, because it's in your library as well.
Yeah, Naomi Klein.
Naomi Klein, yeah.
But yes, what was I going to say about that? I don't want to eat McDonald's MREs after the Great Cascadia earthquake hits.
Yeah.
That sounds awful.
So that's the beauty about Cascadia Ready, is it's getting us ready for that, so that we don't have to have the corporations come in, like Nike, say, hey, we're going to supply everything for it. It's like, well, I mean, they're over here. And that goes back to the thing about localization, having a PUD and stuff like that. That's empowering the community to have power when that disaster hits, and ideally before the disaster hits, and ideally if that disaster never hits.
Yeah.
Well, and it can be other disasters, but disaster capitalism is always there.
Yep.
And stepping into that vacuum.
Yep.
And we need to be able to be prepared to step into that vacuum, and that's Cascadia Ready.
Yep.
Which also, I think Cascadia Ready has a focus on climate change as well. It's not just the subduction zone, but we're talking, we're the Cascadia bioregion,
Right.
And I'm a truck driver by trade, and when we're talking about industrial hemp, what that will do, what I would like to see it do, is supplant all of our logging of the forest, because it's insane to me that the thinking that we can continue to log in perpetuity to our forests and just keep cutting and call them what is it? They've got a slogan out now where they're talking about the forest products where they're renewable forests and whatnot, so they can cut them down. So they've got this campaign out there where they're the logging industry is putting up billboards and stuff like that, and people start to see that meme and see it as believable. But as a truck driver, I see the loggers, if they were making it more democratized, is they own the trucks, make it a worker-owned co-op where they actually own the trucks. Instead of warehousing, going in, logging, the paper mills shut down, the trucks get stopped, and they move out because they've logged everything. And now they need to move into another community, and log their forests. So we have these big, huge corporations who come in, and then it becomes a ghost town. And someone who's running for state treasurer is actually, she wanted to shift the tax burden. Her name is Elizabeth Steiner, and she wanted to shift the tax burden. She did this through the legislature, and she put forward this bill where she would shift the tax burden again off of the logging companies and onto us, we the people. So we'd be paying the taxes for these large corporate logging interests, but we could phase out the logging with industrial hemp, and then we could make, just my idea, if it would work, create a bin, make it out of plastic, hemp plastic, and make it strong tensile, high tensile strength like ABS plastic, and then just fill those bins with big rolls of industrial hemp out in the fields, and put them on the back of the uprights of the logging trucks, and then they can haul it to market. That way we don't we give the jobs to the rural community, so that these logging drivers then become hemp drivers, where they haul the stuff to, because they want jobs, and we keep the jobs in the rural community. We help the rural community. They go out to the farms that are in the rurals, and they grab it and they bring it to production facilities. Maybe we we open up the paper mills again, and hemp is a long batch fiber, so you can use that the longer fiber to create paper over and over again for books. We can create the tables. We can do hemp plastic instead of petroleum plastic cups.
Clothing.
We can do clothing. You can do a multitude of things. You could do telephone poles. You could do guardrails. That look kind of greened up in the posts that hold up the guardrails, so that when they get smashed up and all bent up, you just slap on a new industrial hemp guardrail.
It sounds to me
you
like
can do K-rails, the center median down the road.
It sounds like there's already a decent amount of intellectual capital surrounding industrial uses of hemp, but we don't have enough of the monetary capital flowing in that direction.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you wanted to make the logging companies cooperatives, and I think, Alexander, you also mentioned that you wanted to form a cooperative to make the hemp Cascadia flag.
Yeah, I have a cooperative.
You already have? You still have one? Okay. And
it's not technically cooperative because there's really only two of us, so you have to have, legally you have to have at least 3 people.
You gotta have an odd number.
So if any one of us join up, we'll be official.
But yeah, maybe someone can comment more on the contrast between the cooperative economy and what we traditionally have now in the capitalist one.
Is that me?
It could be you, yeah.
I don't know what to say. Sorry, I had just all of a sudden a brain thing just went pink. Contrast the capitalist economy to a cooperative economy.
Yeah, or just sort of like maybe talk about the structural barriers we have towards getting
there. Oh, there's so many. I mean, why would you go for a cooperative when you have big companies who have all the money controlling things and screwing over the workers? I mean, right now we have Kroger trying to merge with is it Albertsons, or is it
Safeway Albertsons?
Safeway and Albertsons, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we do have a cooperative, a worker-owned cooperative that is fighting against them. I mean, as a market thing, that's Winco.
Mm-hmm.
They are successful. I mean, they're not a true cooperative, but they're pretty close to it. Mm-hmm. So how do we switch over? We have to change the whole infrastructure, which is possible. It's not impossible. It just takes the will.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that our biggest, we could fix climate change tomorrow. We could stop climate change tomorrow. Well, we can alter it.
Mitigate it.
Certainly.
Because the stuff that's coming out now came from 30 years ago, and but it's the will that's the problem. It's really comes down to that. And I mean, I had this one friend who got pissed off at me. So you're privileged. You can't just change that quickly. And it's like, well, but the only problem is we're not willing to do it. We're willing to jump on a plane and fly around it. So.
And we're, if I may,
go for it.
where there's a will, there's a public bank. And and you can take a public bank and you can have its focus be on creating worker co-ops.
Or a public bank or credit union style system.
Yeah. There should be a way to subsidize them and to get some type of management training for them so that they can actually succeed, and you help keep them afloat so that they you don't have this high failure rate, because there's a high failure rate with things like restaurants and stuff like that. But we could also do conversions of things where if an employer said, you know what, I'm going to retire, Bob's Red Mill, for example. And he did this of his own volition, and he went in and he said, here, I'm going to give this to my workers, and make it a worker-owned co-op. And I think that should be something that's available where you say, you've got to stay on for a year and help them keep it afloat, but we'll also have some type of a form of education system where there are people on the ground who actually go around and check up on them and help them with their budgeting, help them set up the formation. There should be resources to that. And I think a state bank could create the funds and able to available in order to create that structure.
Well, one of the keys to a cooperative is basically the workers own the means of production. It's a democratic structure. Right now we don't have that. I think what's his name? Noam Chomsky talks about dictators have more power, or corporations have more power than Stalin could ever imagine, because they can dictate when you go to the bathroom.
Well, that's where Mussolini called,
that's
fascism corporatism.
Yeah.
He said it's more appropriately
called. Well, actually, we don't know if he actually wrote it or anyway. But
interesting.
That's a whole other issue. But I was going to go with that. So a state bank or a network of credit unions that could actually have the workers be able to go get a low interest loan and then buy a share. So we're not taking from the wealthy CEOs, just stealing from them, but we're buying their share away. Or buying their share. They're given, unless they're assholes. Sorry, I cut that.
I think it's cute access,
then just take it. But let's say Bill Gates or somebody, it's like they have a big company, and all of a sudden we're going to legislate that it's going to become a worker-owned cooperative. Okay, then the workers have to take money and buy that share with low interest rate, and then eventually pay off that loan for it. So they would have a voting share, one person, one vote. So then you can democratize the workplace itself. And it's like, why aren't I know the American system is not purely democracy, it's capitalism. But you'd think that a country that claims they love democracy so much would be saying, hey, we need to democratize our workplace.
Well, right, and it always comes back to what we've been talking about, which is we need the will to actually do it.
It's the will,
You need to have workers who are willing to replace some of those, I guess, more managerial functions that create the hierarchies that exist within capitalism. And that's why I've been thinking about, what we've been talking about in terms of getting hemp off the ground, in terms of getting earthquake prepared, more food forests, more community gardens. I feel the will to make these things a reality, and therefore I am more willing to engage with the cooperative and the democratic measures required to be part of an organization like that. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that what we have here is a vision for the future that inspires more willful behavior in people.
And part of that vision of the future should also involve unionization. It should be workers coming together, and we should make that, I was thinking of like the day before Labor Day, making that actually a card check day, where you have a card check week before that, where you gather union cards, and then based on your signature on the union card, I think Oregon should be the United States first union card check state, where the signature on that card basically is your vote. You've already decided. So you have, once you get a majority of cards, I think they should start bargaining in good faith right then and there. Once you turn in enough cards. And if they don't want a union, then sign a non-union card. But I think you're going to have more I want a union, then you're going to have people coming forward and going, oh, we don't want a union, because people are going to want to better their lives. And when more union shops or more workplaces are becoming a union shop, and people are seeing this take off, then they're going to do it. I want to see restaurants go, not just, a Burger King here and there or a Starbucks here and there. I want the ability for everyone to do it. So maybe put forward card check. That's one way. But I also want to see a $25, at least a $25 minimum wage. I'd love to put that in an initiative form and become a chief petitioner of it. But not just a $25 an hour minimum wage. We've been arguing for a $15 an hour minimum wage. And this has been over a long course of time. And we've progressed up to where we have a $15 an hour or close to it minimum wage. And it should have a cost of living adjustment, that is attached to inflation and indexed to it, so that we don't have to continue to argue in the future. It's already moving along, so that in 30 years from now we're not saying, we should kind of have a $50 an hour minimum wage, when everybody else is making like $60 and $70 or $80. I'm just putting it out there as a crazy example of the way things could go.
Right.
But there's that, and then there are other things like a maximum wage. Why, cooperatives have a maximum wage. Why couldn't we do this like a union contract, to where we've already argued it for everyone, that everyone has this, not just someone who has a union contract, but we've got a $25 an hour, which is closer to a living wage, and then we attach that to the cost of living adjustment, and then everyone's doing well. And then if you have a maximum wage, that should be probably put on a wage ratio at like say 10-1, so that the person at the top who's making however much in the company can't make more than 10 times the lowest paid worker.
Wasn't it like Ben and Jerry's or somebody that did that?
There
It was some company.
That's usually in the charter for.
Right. I thought it was an ice cream company that did that or something like that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I know that Mondrian of Spain, their cooperative has a very strict wage ratio.
Yeah, like 6-1 or something.
Yeah, no, it used to be very stringent. I'm sure they've loosened it up in recent days, just because they're starting to resemble more of a traditional corporate structure. But I'm in favor of all these things, and it also seems like diverting funds away from Wall Street, even if we're just a little drop in the bucket as a state, that will cause less inflationary mechanisms to occur, right? Because ultimately inflation occurs when there's just like more frivolous money floating around in the economy, and that happens when there's high speculation, which happens when we let Wall Street do whatever they want.
Right.
So
when we start to invest in the natural wealth and abundance that we have here in Oregon, and think about how can we improve it and take our labor and use it towards making the place that we live better, that's like deflationary, because it's storing value in the landscape, it's storing value in the community. Right. And what are we concerned about with inflation? It's like day-to-day expenses, things like, can I afford groceries? Why is food becoming more expensive? It's like, well, if we're growing more food, that would be a deflationary pressure in terms of prices like that. And if we're building sustainable, affordable homes to get earthquake ready, similarly there, and like another policy that Chris has, rent control, we don't even have that in Portland. So it feels, I think these are all a lot of very new creative policy ideas, others like traditional, very popular policy ideas. So we're very excited that this is an opportunity and an opening for those kinds of things to actually gain entry into city council, because without matching funds, which we finally have this cycle, for obvious reasons, the big money interests and the corporations are not going to back this kind of policy. They're not going to back a candidate like Chris. They would traditionally be pouring money into Chris's rivals, but now we actually have a legal mechanism to stop them from doing that and to have public funds support candidates who are advocating for things in the public interest. And so we got 60 days until the election is going to come up, and we're going to be doing our best to put these messages out to people, talk with them about what they're interested in, what they want to see happen, and what they care about, and really rally people around it, because any of these ideas are going to sink or float based on the involvement of the community, because their strength is that they are community grounded. Their success comes from drawing their strength in community and seeing community as abundance.
Yeah, and you should have things like what I would argue is we should have a 4-day work week every week. You should have a 3-day weekend every weekend so that you can work in the community and create community. You've got time to be home and be with your family and to actually have a life and some livelihood. I mean, in Europe, they have 4-day work weeks, you know, and it gives people more time to get involved in politics and to understand politics and to create the communities that we want and that we want to be centered on. And you don't want to start paying someone $25 an hour and then landlords to raise the rents.
Yeah.
And to say, wait, you're making more. So this kind of has to go in together. You need to argue for both of these at the same time, or it's going to be like, that's disaster capitalism right there on a micro scale. Okay. Well, no, it's a macro scale. It's large.
It's slower. It's not as dramatic as a hurricane or
sometimes
earthquake, but it's a slow disaster capitalism.
A slow tsunami of
It's a daily
trying to put bandages
with
on problems and then not plugging up all the holes. So it's just
and just greed. I mean, the reason why we are having the cost of living going up is because the landlords raise the rent. The moment they raise rent, all of a sudden, employers had to pay more for their employees because they couldn't afford living at the place that they were living at to go to work. And it's like, okay, now we need to have a increase in our wages, and then that started raising the price of food and stuff. I really do blame the landlords on this one. I really do. During right after the pandemic, because they were so greedy to get their money back.
And it seems to me like if we can have worker cooperatives, why can't we also have housing cooperatives?
Yeah, exactly.
And we should use the
where
public
you own
bank.
the home.
Yeah,
you own the housing, the entire apartment community.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really impressed by the amount of knowledge and wisdom that all three of you have brought to the table here. I have a lot of concerns, and you guys have assuaged maybe a lot of them. But we're running out of time, so that's it.
Did we solve the world's problems yet?
Not yet. That's next episode. Next episode, we're going to save the world, baby. What's the name of the show again?
Equity Repair.
Equity Repair. Yeah, you've been watching Equity Repair. And until next time, I'm your host, Corey Wolfe.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah.